Professor of Cancer Sciences at the University of Nottingham, or one of several professors of cancer sciences, not just me, but I'm the course director for our cancer sciences courses. So what I thought I'd do today is to tell you a little bit about our cancer sciences courses, but maybe also talk a little bit about biomedical sciences and related courses, because I think one of the things that, from my experience anyway, is that a lot of young people might have sort of drift into things because they've heard of them. So they've heard of medicine, so they'll drift into medicine. They've heard of veterinary science, so they'll drift in that direction. But they might not have heard of things like molecular therapeutics or cancer sciences or biomedical sciences. So I think it's good to sort of try and tell people about some of these other courses. So I'll start at the beginning, though, of why we're interested in cancer. And as I said before, if you've got any questions, just stick your hand up and stop me, because otherwise I'll talk forever. So I'm very interested in cancer biology and cancer and why cancer happens. And the reason for that is shown on this graph. So this graph shows the incidence of cancers worldwide, and it's basically ranks some of the top most common cancers that are found around the world. And I've divided up on this graph into incidence in the developing world, that means rich countries, and in the the developing world, which is poor countries, and the developed world, which is rich countries. And you can see there, this is cases. So for a cancer like lung cancer, there are about 700,000 or 680,000 cancer cases detected every year. Now you can converting that into death rates is a bit difficult, because each different cancer is a completely different disease, and it has a completely different relationship between case incidence and death. In the case of lung cancer, it's pretty much a very high transition. So if there are about 600,000 cases per year, there are also about 600,000 deaths per year. Of course, it's not the same people, because some of them were diagnosed a few years ago. But the survival rate for lung cancer is pretty low. In contrast, the survival rate for breast cancer is very high. So there are fewer deaths. But what you can see is if you add all these cases together and all the cancer deaths together, it comes to a very high number. And it's about 2.2 million cases, cancer deaths per year worldwide. So that's basically why we're interested in it. Some of these cancers occur more frequently in rich countries. So, for example, in the case of lung cancer, as I'm sure you all know, the primary cause of lung cancer in the West is cigarette smoking. So in rich countries where there's more cigarette smoking, then there's a higher incidence of lung cancer. As countries become richer, the incidence of lung cancer goes up. And that's just to do with the fact that they're getting richer and then they're developing more sort of bad habits. So I got interested in this because basically at heart, I'm a virologist. I study viruses and how they're involved in cancer. And you might not be aware that viruses are a major cause of cancers worldwide. I hope you've all heard of papillomavirus, because hopefully you've all been vaccinated to protect you against some papillomavirus types. But papillomaviruses are the causative agent of cervical cancer, and they're also important in head and neck cancer and a whole bunch of other cancers that affect humans. Now, in the case of cervical cancer, we know that this virus causes about 100% of all cases of cervical cancer. But in other cancer types, it's harder to work out what's going on, because in head and neck cancer, about half of cases of head and neck cancer are caused by papillomaviruses, and the other half are caused by other things, such as, for example, cigarette smoke and the chemicals that are found within cigarette smoke. So sometimes it's easy to link a virus to cancer, and sometimes it's a bit more difficult because of this sort of complication. Another example is hepatitis B. Hepatitis B is the causative agent of some cases of liver cancer. And in fact, worldwide, around 80% of cases of liver cancer are caused by hepatitis B infection. Epstein-Barr virus also causes cancers in humans, and there are some very rare viruses that you probably never heard of, like, for example, Merkel cell polyomavirus. This is a newly discovered virus that causes a very rare cancer called Merkel cell carcinoma. And as far as we know, every case of Merkel cell carcinoma is caused originally by a polyomavirus infection. So why am I telling you all this? Why is it important? Well, the reason it's important is because of what I mentioned at the beginning, which is vaccines. Because we know that these viruses are major causes of cancer, if we can prevent these virus infections, then we can stop the cancer cases. And most people in the UK now, most young people, are vaccinated to protect them against HPV. And the reason for that is to protect them against the cancers that this virus causes. So it's really good news, because what it means is if we can develop vaccines to all these different viruses, and if we can get those viruses into people in the developing world and in the developed world and get everybody vaccinated, then we can drastically reduce the incidence of cancer. Of course, not every cancer is caused by a virus infection. In fact, most cancers are not caused by a virus infection, they're caused by something else. So for example, head and neck cancer, as I said, half are caused by virus infection, half are caused by something else. So we have to develop new ways of treating those other non-virus cancers as well. And the news there is also really fantastically good. New drugs are being developed and released onto the market and being used at a hugely increasing rate. So the graph on the left here, for example, shows the FDA approvals. So the FDA in the United States is the Food and Drug Administration. They approve new drugs for use in humans. And this is the approval of new drugs since 1996, or for about a 20-year period. And the black line shows you there that a huge number of new drugs are being given approval all of the time. One of them is called Alotinib. So it's just to give one example. Alotinib is a specific antibody that targets something called the epidermal growth factor receptor, and that's proven to be very useful in the treatment of lung cancer. So on the right here, it just shows you that for some types of cancer, up to 12 new drugs have been approved in that period. In the case of lung cancer, 6 new drugs have been approved in that time period. So lots of new drugs are becoming available, and hopefully they will reduce the number of deaths that occur to these other types of cancer. And most of the new drugs that are coming available are what we would call smart drugs or targeted therapies. So these two pie charts show the different types of drug that were given approval in 2 different time periods, so an old time period and a more recent time period. And you can see there that the most common type of drug therapy that was approved between 1997 and 2012 were chemotherapies. Now, the chemotherapies are basically poisons that kill all cells. If you're lucky, they kill cancer cells a bit more than they kill normal cells, but most of them just kill cells. And so they kill rapidly dividing cells, and cancer cells are rapidly dividing, so they kill cancer cells a bit sort of preferentially. But they have terrible side effects, as you all know, and they're not very useful. Well, they are useful, but the trouble is that they come with these very bad side effects. However, what's happening more recently is that a whole new generation of drugs are being approved, and that's been shown in red here on the pie charts. And these are things called targeted therapies. So these are drugs that are a bit like Alotinib that specifically target one molecule which is present within the cancer cells. In the case of Alotinib, it targets a growth factor receptor and specifically stops cells with that growth factor receptor, stops them from growing. So these new targeted therapies are coming available at a very high rate, and we need this to continue over the next couple of decades, so that eventually there are going to be literally hundreds of new drugs that can be used to treat cancer patients. But the trouble is that this drug development process is very long and it's very expensive, and it requires a huge amount of investment. So the normal pathway for drug discovery is shown in this graphic, and it normally starts with a particular target for a drug, and then the drug itself, a small molecule, normally has to be developed, sometimes a large molecule like an antibody. Either way, that molecule then has to be tested, usually in the laboratory, usually using cancer cell lines. So these are cancer cells that are grown in the laboratory. So this, in the picture there on the right, there's a researcher working in a lab, and she might be growing cells in the laboratory. We can then test these drugs on the cell lines that are growing and see if they work. If they kill cancer cells, but hopefully don't kill normal cells, then they can move into in vivo testing, and that basically means testing in animals. We can grow tumors in animals and then see whether they will work in animals. That's great, but it doesn't guarantee that they're going to work in humans, of course. Then we can move on to toxicology testing to make sure that the drugs just don't kill people or cause terrible side effects. If that seems to be okay, then we can go into phase 1 clinical trials. Phase 1 clinical trial just means testing in a healthy person and seeing whether the drug can be tolerated. If that works, it can then be tested in the phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials where it's used to try and treat the disease. So this is a hugely long process and is massively expensive, and it requires lots of really highly skilled researchers, some of whom are doctors, and we'll talk about that in a minute, some of whom are lab workers like myself, and either way, it requires lots of highly trained scientists. It also requires a supply chain to provide those researchers with all of the things that they need to do their experiments. So for everything from the gloves that they wear to the masks that they wear, just like in PPE from COVID. But also once the drugs have been identified and produced, they need to be marketed and they need to be regulated. So we need to make sure that any drugs that are sold or that are used by the NHS, for example, are effective. So you need a whole regulatory system in place to control the use of these drugs. And of course, that requires people who are highly knowledgeable in the area of cancer biology. Similarly, we need people who can educate the public about things like vaccines to make sure that vaccines are taken up. Just last week, I was in Malaysia talking to people over there about cancer vaccination programs. And it turns out that in Malaysia, the take-up rate for HPV vaccine is only 13%. So it's 13%. It's terrible. It's never going to eradicate cervical cancer in Malaysia unless we can get that up to 99% or 100%. Same thing in the UK. In the UK, the take-up rate is much, much higher. It's more like 85%. Either way, we need educators who can go out and convince people to get vaccinated. Otherwise, we're never going to cure this problem. Also, we need people who can talk to our politicians, our policymakers, and convince them to, for example, implement vaccination of people so that the population, so that we can reduce cancer incidence. If we don't convince politicians to make these vaccines and drugs available, they won't be made available because they're expensive. So there are lots of different career opportunities within this sort of cancer science field. There's clinicians, and clinicians are vital, but we also need researchers who are going to go out and do the lab work that's required to find these different curative molecules and get them tested. We need people who can analyze data really well as well. So we need data analysts who can work in the cancer research field, and they can use the huge amounts of data that are now being produced. So for example, now we can sequence the genomes of cancer patients and we can look at every different mutation that's present within a cancer cell, but we need people who are skilled in data analysis to understand all of that data. We can also build new ways to detect cancer. So there are now new scanners that can detect cancer very efficiently, but we need engineers who can build these new scanners and operate these scanners. We need people who can run clinical trials, so making sure that clinical trials work properly and are done properly. Nottingham is very lucky. We have a clinical trials unit. Many universities now have a clinical trials unit to start bringing these drugs that are discovered to clinical trials. We need people who are involved in sales and marketing, as I mentioned before, because things just don't happen by themselves. You need the capitalist machine to get all these things to work. And then again, we need people who can talk to our policymakers. So we need people who can advocate for these drugs and advocate for different treatments. And a lot of this is based on venture capitalists, as I said before. So we need people who can work in the venture capitalist companies and decide which treatments to invest in, because obviously companies are only going to invest in treatments that are going to be profitable at the end of the day. And also, there's more than one way to get into medicine as well. So although the traditional way is to go straight into medical school, and a lot of students go straight into medical schools, there's also graduate entry medicine where people with a degree in, for example, cancer sciences or biomedical sciences can go into any of these different areas and also do medicine as well. So I want to just talk a little bit about how people can get into these different areas. But first of all, before I go on, I want to stop for a minute because I've talked too much and just say, has anybody got any questions before I carry on?
I'm getting nods at this end, Kevin, so we're soaking up all the wonderful information. Thank you.
Well, if you do have any questions, just stop me, because I'll rabbit on for a long time if I'm left to my own devices.
We're fine. They've got
any questions, or shall I just carry on?
Yeah, so just carry on, please, Kevin. Thank you.
Okay, I'll carry on. Okay, so how do you get into this area? How do you get into cancer research, cancer treatment? How do you get into it? Well, obviously, you all know about medicine. So you can go and study medicine at university, and I'm not telling anybody to not do that. It's a fantastic profession, and it's an easy way in. I want to talk more, though, about some areas that you probably haven't heard so much about, and which would also be of interest. Anybody who's interested in medicine is going to be interested in these other things that I'm going to tell you a little bit about. So there are lots of subjects that are called in the trade, we call them subjects allied to medicine. And in allied to medicine, we have things like physiotherapy, pharmacology, physiology. There's a whole raft of these different courses, biochemistry and neuroscience, a huge number of different courses. And my advice is always to find out about these different courses that you may not have considered before, but that can be equally or even more rewarding than medicine. So physiology, for example, is fantastic for people who want to understand about how the human body works and how that is linked to disease. You might have also heard about biomedical sciences. And again, biomedical sciences is a fantastic way into learning about into this area. To make things complicated, though, there are two different types of biomedical sciences courses. There are accredited courses and there are research-based courses. The accredited courses are for people who really want to get into the laboratory and do things like be a biomedical laboratory scientist. So that means people who are working in hospitals, for example, doing clinical tests. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a very important career, and we need people who are doing that. It's a very rewarding job, because you're doing very important tests to try and diagnose the diseases that patients have. Personally, I wouldn't find it interesting, because personally, I'm more interested in research and finding out about what are the causes of cancer and how we can develop new treatments. So I'm more interested in the research-based biomedical sciences courses. And these are courses which are training people more, for example, to do PhDs, or, for example, to go into medicine as graduate entry medicine. So biomedical sciences, all I would say is, if you're looking at that, be careful which courses you look at, because you've got to choose the right course. If you want to work in a hospital laboratory, then you need an accredited course. If you want to do research, then you can do either an accredited course or a research-based course. And then finally, down at the end there is the courses that you probably haven't heard of before, because they're very new, and that's cancer sciences. So I'll tell you a little bit about our cancer sciences courses now. Only 3 universities in the UK do cancer sciences courses for undergraduates, and Nottingham was the first. So, and the best, I would say. So what is cancer sciences? Well, cancer sciences is studying the science that underpins cancer, and that includes everything from fundamental research, like I've been telling you about, drug discovery that I mentioned briefly, and also through to patient care. So it's the entire science of cancer, how we can make cancer drug discovery more scientific, how we can make cancer treatment and patient care more scientific, and make sure that we do what is appropriate and what works. So we developed these courses and started them about 5 years ago now. I think we started them in 2019. And their aim is to provide a thorough biomedical science education, but then we focus on cancer right from the beginning. When we do that, because in most biomedical sciences courses, you join the course, and then by the time you get to year 3, you might start to do some interesting stuff. But we didn't want to do it that way. What we do instead is that we want to put the interesting stuff right at the beginning. So we start the focus on cancer from day 1, and then we teach people about specific cancer types and the causes of cancer, and then we use that to explain the biochemistry, instead of doing it the other way around. Typically in a biochemistry course or a biomedical sciences course, you learn about the nuts and bolts of how cells work and how human biology works, and eventually, a couple of years later, you learn about disease. So we do it the other way around. We we hook people in by telling them about cancer right from the very beginning. And our courses are very research intensive. They've been very successful. We've got lots of students now studying cancer sciences, well over 150 students now on these courses at Nottingham University. And I won't go through this in detail because it's not going to be that interesting to you, but just to show you what I mean by this concentration on cancer in year one. So the reason that this course is different is because we start teaching about the hallmarks of cancer and causes of cancer in first year modules. We don't keep the good bits until year 3. We start right from the very beginning. But as I said before, we still have to teach the basic biomedical sciences. So we have genes, molecules, and cells, and we have human physiology. And then in year 2, we teach about specific types of cancer, and we use those cancers as a way in to talk about the biology. So for example, we have these different modules in year 2, 6 different modules. I'll only talk about one of them, which is the lung cancer, prostate cancer, and breast cancer. We have a module about these different types of cancer because we use these cancers to explain the biology of hormones, because hormones are very important in these cancers. So we use different cancer types as a way to tell people about specific cancers. And then in year 3, our students do research projects. Students in all different undergraduate degrees will do research projects. So I'm not going to go into details about that, but other than to say it's really important that when you do go to university, make sure you go to a university which is going to give you a good research project. And that means usually working one-to-one, not in some big group, but working one-to-one with an established researcher. That's what we do in Nottingham, and that's what any university that you apply to should be doing. And then our students take optional modules as well. So we also have an MSci course, and I don't know if you've heard of MSci courses, but they're becoming very popular now, so I thought I'd mention it. MSci courses are 4 years instead of 3 years. A typical undergraduate course is 3 years, an MSci course is 4 years. And what makes these courses different is that they include a placement in industry. So usually 1 year of the course is spent working in industry. In our MSci for cancer sciences, it's a 9-month placement in industry, and our students go and work in a company. And it could be, for example, a drug discovery company, or it could be some other kind of company, and they do that placement, and then they write up a report or a dissertation based on what they've done in the company. And it's a really good way of students getting a taste of what working in industry is all about. So MSci courses are not, they're still not they're not mainstream. They're still quite rare, but they're becoming more common. And I would advise you to, if you're really interested in going to work in industry, then an MSci course is something that you should definitely consider. It doesn't have to be cancer sciences, of course. It could be any of these other courses like pharmacology or physiology or biomedical sciences. But if you look out for MScis, that's what they're all about. And I'm not going to go through this because you can read it if you're interested. But just to say that in our courses, what I love about what we've done is that we've started from a blank piece of paper and we made our course from scratch. And so because of that, we can do all sorts of interesting things that don't happen in typical university courses. So for example, we include something called flipped teaching, where we don't have boring lectures all the time. What we do instead is that we give our students material, they take it away, they study it, and then they present it back to us, and then we critique what they've done. So it's a way of learning which is not about just somebody talking to you like I'm doing now in a boring way. And to tell you the kinds of things we do, we study, for example, in year 1, the hallmarks of cancer, how it occurs, how the cell cycle is disrupted, how cells go wrong. That's through things like genome instability. We talk about the mechanisms that allow tumors to grow, and we talk about cancer cell invasion. Of course, we have to do this at a level that is suitable for a first-year student, so we do it in a low level of detail. And as we go through the course, we can go into more and more detail. And this is typical way of delivery for this course, but it's typical for all university science courses. And when you're applying to university, you should look and see what your courses are actually delivering. And typically in our courses, we would have lectures where we have a large group of students. On this particular module, we have about 110 students a year, and they would all be together for a lecture, and they'd have 20 of those lectures in this module. They would also do practical classes, but we have to go beyond that. So they also do things like essay writing workshops, And also we have to teach them about exams as well. So they do a mock MCQ exam, multiple choice exam, and they do an MCQ exam. So that's how the course is delivered. Our students produce fantastic work. I think this is part of this flip teaching that I was telling you about. So these are just some examples of some leaflets that were produced by our year 1 students. And I'm not going to go into the details of what they're about, but I just wanted to show you them because I think they're so professional and look so good. So our students are producing really great work. And I think that's because they're really engaged in what they're doing and they love what they're doing. And third year research projects, we can't emphasize that too much. You do look for courses that have good third year research projects, not group projects, but working on one-to-one basis with researchers. So for example, these are some of the courses, some of the practical projects that we offer. We offer literally hundreds, but these are just some of them. And in this case, if a student goes to do the project with Sarah Storr, they work directly with Sarah Storr on a one-to-one level. Same thing if they go and do work with Paloma. All universities do this. I'm not going to go into detail about that, but you just make sure that whichever university you choose has a good system of support, because it's very important that you get a high level of support when you go to university. It's a new experience. It's a challenging experience, and so you need things like personal tutors, senior tutors, academic support workers, mental health first aiders. Make sure that your university, whichever you choose, provides all these things. And also, if you can, make sure that they work in a fantastic place. So I'll just put in a plug there for our cancer centre in Nottingham, which is in a brand new building, and we have fantastic facilities and fantastic labs where students can come and do their projects. So the point I'm trying to make here is